We've been working our way through Deuteronomy, chapter by chapter, verse by verse. This chapter is going to reinforce in your minds what I told you about Middle Eastern communication methods. You never say something just once if you mean it. You say it 2, 3, 4 times to get it across.
What'd you say, chapter what?
Chapter
12.
Chapter 12.
Okay. Now, theologically, there's not a lot of content to this chapter. And as you know, Deuteronomy is a commentary on the 10 Commandments. It's still commenting on the first couple commandments, and this one's going to emphasize one aspect of that. We'll read through the chapter, and you're going to notice that there are entire paragraphs that are almost word-for-word repetitions of previous paragraphs in the chapter. God's being very Middle Eastern. He's saying it over and over again so that you get it. Okay. Starting in verse 1, we'll read through to the end. These are the decrees and laws you must be careful to follow in the land that Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, has given you to possess, as long as you live in the land. Destroy completely all the places on the high mountains, on the hills, and under every spreading tree, where the nations you are dispossessing worship their gods. Break down their altars, smash their sacred stones, and burn their Asherah poles in the fire. Cut down the idols of their gods, and wipe out their names from those places. You must not worship Yahweh your God in their way, but you are to seek the place Yahweh your God will choose from among all your tribes to put his name there for his dwelling. To that place you must go. There bring your burnt offerings and sacrifices, your tithes and special gifts. But you have vowed to give and your freewill offerings, and the firstborn of your herds and flocks. There in the presence of Yahweh your God, you and your family shall eat and shall rejoice in everything you have put your hand to, because Yahweh your God has blessed you. You are not to do as we do here today, everyone doing as they see fit, since you have not yet reached the resting place and the inheritance Yahweh your God has given you. But you will cross the Jordan and settle in the land Yahweh your God has given you as an inheritance, and he will give you rest from all your enemies around, so that you will live in safety. Then to the place Yahweh your God will choose as a dwelling for his name, there to bring everything I have commanded you, your burnt offerings and sacrifices, your tithes and gifts, and all the choice possessions you have vowed to Yahweh, and there rejoice before Yahweh your God, you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, the Levites from your towns who have no allotment or inheritance of their own. Be careful not to sacrifice your burnt offerings anywhere you please. Offer them only at the place Yahweh will choose in one of your tribes, and there observe everything I command you. Nevertheless, you may slaughter your animals in any of your towns, and eat as much of the meat as you want, as if it were gazelle or deer, according to the blessing Yahweh your God gives you. Both the clean and the unclean may eat of it, but you must not eat the blood poured out on the ground like water. You must not eat in your own towns the tithe of your grain and new wine and olive oil, or the firstborn of your herds and flocks, or whatever you have vowed to give, or your freewill offerings or special gifts. Instead, you are to eat them in the presence of Yahweh your God at the place Yahweh your God will choose. You, your sons, your daughters, your male and female servants, and the Levites from your towns. And you are to rejoice before Yahweh your God in everything you put your hand to. Be careful not to neglect the Levites as long as you live in your land. When Yahweh your God has enlarged your territory as he promised you, and you crave meat and say, I would like some meat, then you may eat as much of it as you want. If the place where Yahweh your God chooses to put his name is too far away from you, you may slaughter animals from the herds and flocks Yahweh has given you, as I have commanded you, and in your own towns you may eat as much of them as you want. Eat them as you would gazelle or deer. Both clean and unclean may eat. But be sure you do not eat the blood, because the blood is the life, and you must not eat the life with the meat. You must not eat the blood Pour it out on the ground like water. Do not eat it, so that it may go well with you and your children after you, because you will be doing what is right in the eyes of Yahweh. But take your consecrated things and whatever you have vowed to give, and go to the place Yahweh will choose. Present your burnt offerings on the altar of Yahweh your God, both the meat and the blood. The blood of your sacrifices must be poured beside the altar of Yahweh your God, but you may eat the meat. Be careful to obey all these regulations I am giving you, so that it may always go well with you and your children after you, because you will be doing what is good and right in the eyes of Yahweh your God. Yahweh your God will cut off before you the nations you are about to invade and dispossess. But when you have driven them out and settled in their land, and after they have been destroyed before you, be careful not to be ensnared by inquiring after their gods, saying, how did these nations worship their gods? We will do the same. You must not worship Yahweh your God in their way, because in worshiping their gods, they do all kinds of detestable things Yahweh hates. They even burn their sons and daughters in the fire as sacrifices to their gods. See, do all that I command you. Do not add to it or take away from it. Okay, did anybody notice the repetition?
Yes.
Yes. It was nauseating, wasn't it? You know, say it over and over again, say it over again and again.
Do not eat the blood, you know, blood, you know, worship them the way.
Yeah. Bring your sacrifices to the place I will choose. Okay. Think he's making a point?
Do not worship me the way they worship their gods.
Yeah. So, like I said, theologically, there's not a lot of real interesting content here, but there is the main point. Do it the way I said to. Don't go making up your own religious practices.
He mentioned tithes a lot too, which is real good for a lot of people who don't understand that, like my daughter. You know, here it is. He said it with his words.
Yeah.
The word tithing, duh. And he must like to eat with us.
Jim.
I think I remember a long time it says in verse 17, you must not eat in your own towns the tithe of your grain and new wine and oil, or the firstborn of your herds and flocks. Was there a provision if they were to go to Jerusalem that they could sacrifice, or if they were traveling that they could do that? Because it seems like they're not supposed to do it in their own towns. There must be some kind of reason for that.
Yeah, the things that are dedicated to God, you don't eat in your own town. You go to the temple. Okay, and that way, you know, some of it goes to the priest, but then you also share in the food. Okay? So when you take your tithe, not all of it goes to the temple. Some of it is there, you know, everybody's eating. The feasts of Yahweh were that. They were feasts. Okay? They were feasts. You know, the whole nation got together at least 3 times a year. All the men were required to go to Jerusalem. And they would bring their tithes and offerings. Okay? And they would offer it at the temple, but you also got to share in it. You and the priests would eat together.
The women and the children? Or,
The women, the children, the servants, okay?
yeah, they said that.
Wow.
The men had to go, okay?
Oh,
The women and children didn't have to go, but let's put it this way, if your husband was going to head to Jerusalem, and you know that there's going to be this giant feast going on with lots of rejoicing, dancing, singing, drinking, partying, just, I mean, it's going to be, you know, 3 times a year, 3 times a
Drinking and
year.
partying, not so much.
And 3 times a year, there's going to be this fantastic party in Jerusalem. Are you going to let him go by himself?
probably not.
No, no. And a generous householder would bring his servants and everybody with him. You know, come up, be a part of this. Okay, we're going up to worship God.
So all the millions
It seems interesting that
came in.
they had herds, they were
Jerusalem
ranchers.
went from a population of 200,000 to 1 million, or 2 million at the time of the feasts. So think about this. Town sometimes grew by as much as 10 times during a feast period. People everywhere. Okay, and they had processionals and ceremonies they did that, you know, just to process down to the pool of Siloam to get a pitcher of water to bring back up to the temple, probably had thousands of people following along. It probably took all day just to go get that pitcher of water because there were so many people involved. Okay, and the Levites would be in the temple singing through the different Hallels and stuff. It was big stuff. Okay, and he says, go there and rejoice before Yahweh because of the good things He's done for you. Okay. Okay, it points out, that this is the God of your ancestors who's telling you this. And first thing first, destroy all the pagan religious stuff in the land. When you get in there, this is going to be a clean sweep. Okay, once you cross the Jordan, this is a new start. Okay, you're out here in the desert, and this is kind of surprising to us. Verse 8, he says, you are not to do as we do here today, everyone doing as they see fit. We keep thinking, Moses is in charge, they've got the tabernacle, and everybody's going to the tabernacle to make their offerings. That's an overly optimistic view according to what Moses says here. He's saying, I know that you guys are still sneaking out in the desert to offer sacrifices. Okay?
Really?
Yes. Okay, and you see this in other passages as well. The people had not fully committed themselves to Yahweh. But he's telling them, once you cross the Jordan, you get to a different situation. Okay? And there's something that's going to come up here. We'll get to it later. Let's go on verse by verse. Okay, verse 4. He says, you must not worship Yahweh your God in their way. No. You're going to follow the leadership and seeking the place that God's going to put His name. Now that's an interesting phrase that doesn't really communicate to us in a sense. But it's like, I'm going to put my name in this place. This is the place where if you want me to hear your prayer, you address me here. If you want to offer worship, you come here and offer this worship. And he's specifically talking about sacrifices. He's not saying you can't pray anywhere, that you can't just worship God anywhere. But when you offer your sacrifices and all that, you do it here at this place.
Sorry.
Okay, so he's being very specific. You don't offer your sacrifices in your hometown. Why? Because he already knows that people are offering wrong sacrifices. This is supposed to be regulated. Okay, we don't want pagan sacrifices being done because that will bring God's curse into Israel. Do it according to the prescription. In a sense, it's kind of like, if a doctor gives you medicine and says, take this amount 3 times a day, if you ignore that, you can wind up in some serious trouble. Anybody ever see the movie The Madness of King George? Okay, the doctor gives him this container of medicine, and he says, okay, take this little vial of it, before bed. And he gets called back a few hours later. The king is sick as a dog. And he says, okay, what happened? You were doing, fine a couple hours ago. And he says, well, I took the medicine you gave me. And the doctor walks over, picks up the jug, and it's empty. He says, did you drink the whole thing? He says, yeah. He says, that little cup might be good for a commoner, but I'm a blue blood royal king, so I took it all. And it's like, okay, well, you just made yourself really sick. Okay, and God's saying, this is what I'm saying is the right way to do it. This is what pleases me, and I will bless this. If you vary from it, you're going to get into trouble. That's why we try not to invent things. Sometimes you can go to religious ceremonies of other religions and you say, wow, that looked really cool. That felt really sentimentally good. Let's bring that into our worship. But if it's not something God prescribed, don't bring it in. Now, even though it may look good in a touchy-feely sort of way, if it's not what God asked for, don't do it.
It might be good for you, per se, to feel good, but God isn't going to be accepting of it.
Yeah. And when you think about worship, when we worship God, what are we doing? We're emulating His character, His attitudes. When you bring something in from outside, then you're not copying Him. Because what does it mean to be godly? It means to be like God. How is God best worshipped? By being like God.
So he must have liked it. Happy family fun.
What's that?
He liked happy family fun.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
And so that's a good thing. It's a shame they keep messing things
Well, let me give you an example that's perfectly current right here and now. You'll notice we're not doing anything with Halloween. We're not bringing any Halloween stuff in here. Okay, Halloween is paganism. Okay, the world is all out there having parties and saying, oh, well, this is fun, this is cool. And how many of the churches are having pumpkin sales out in their front yard? You know, and they're putting stuff up around inside the church. It doesn't belong there. Okay, that's not what God prescribed. God said, I want you to walk in my ways. Don't follow the ways of the pagans. Well, that's paganism. Don't bring it in. Anyway, getting back to our text. Verse 10 says, but you will cross the Jordan and settle in the land Yahweh your God has given you as an inheritance, and he will give you rest. They're entering into a new type of life. Now, there's an interesting thing that comes up in Scripture that we wouldn't normally realize, except that Paul tells us. In 1 Corinthians 10, verses 1 and 2, you're going to see something that forms a pattern. Why is crossing the Jordan important?
Get into Israel.
Passing through the water.
Yeah, that's it.
Crossing
1 Corinthians 10:1 says, for I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers, that our forefathers were all under the cloud, and that they all passed through the sea. They were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. Now that's interesting. Baptism, or a mikvah, going through the water, is something you do when you're entering into a new phase of life. You do the mikvah when you get bar mitzvah, you do the mikvah when you get married, you do the mikvah when you go into the priesthood, you do the mikvah when you enter into a new area of life. Because what you're saying is, my old life is over, my new life has begun. Okay? And so I'm leaving the old behind, I'm entering into the new. When Moses led Israel out of Egypt and they passed through the Red Sea, it says they went through a baptism. They went through a mikvah because they were leaving that old life behind. They were entering into a new life where they were traveling with God. Now, 40 years later, they're about to do the same thing, except it's crossing the Jordan. And the same kind of miracle is going to take place. When they crossed the Red Sea, God held the waters back till they crossed. Okay? The Egyptians came along and the water came back and drowned. When they cross the Jordan, God is going to hold the water back again. And again, they're going to cross through. They're going through a type of mikvah. And it's saying, you're leaving that old life behind, you're starting a new life. You're entering into the Holy Land. Live according to your new calling. Your calling is to be the holy people of God in His Holy Land. Okay, get rid of all the pagan stuff and only go to the place that God ordains to offer your sacrifices. So it's like a new start. The whole thing, you know, you had that life there, but now you're going to sanctify yourself and live a holy life. Okay, and that's why crossing the Jordan is so significant here. And he mentions it again a couple times in this chapter, just like he mentions everything a couple times in this chapter.
I probably really need a mikvah, don't
I think so.
I? I think
Coming
so.
into a new home.
And a whole new everything, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Make a note.
Yeah.
Now, he repeatedly says, be careful not to offer your sacrifices anywhere except to where I put my name to dwell. Okay, now, he also makes the point in verse 15, nevertheless, you may slaughter your animals in any of your towns and eat as much of the meat as you want. And again, he'll repeat that 2 or 3 times in this chapter. Why would there be any confusion about this?
Well, you want to differentiate between just your normal everyday food and separate from what is offered to God.
Right? Okay, why would there be any confusion in that?
Well, if you have to go to Jerusalem or to that place to slaughter the animal for sacrifice, maybe you have to do that for everything.
Okay, and the reason for the confusion is, in English we can say slaughter and we can say sacrifice, and we mean 2 different things.
Right.
In Hebrew, it's the word slaughter. you have to look at the context to see whether it's being a slaughter or a sacrifice. So in that sense, in Hebrew, it's kind of confusing. Okay, so he's saying, okay, so if there's no confusion, you can slaughter your animals and eat meat in your town, but if you're offering something to God, it has to be in His place, under His terms. Okay, so, and again, he repeats this 2 or 3 times. You can eat meat as much as you want. So when you get to some of those people that tell you you're only supposed to eat the things that are in the first 3 chapters of Genesis, remember Deuteronomy 12 and say, okay, well, it may have been that way for Adam. He was a vegetarian and that's the way God set it up. But at this point, God says meat is just fine. Okay? In fact, could you celebrate God's feast without eating meat?
No.
No.
No, Passover. You have to eat the lamb. God requires you at least once a year to eat a piece of lamb. So, for those who are avid vegetarians, don't be cowed by them. Scripture doesn't support their position. Verse 19, it says, be careful not to neglect the Levites as long as you live in your land. It's funny because that phrasing is so close to something in the New Testament. Why would that, first of all, why would you want to not neglect the Levites?
Because they're your priests.
They're your
They're
mediator.
intermediary between you and God.
Yeah, so
Well,
why would they need to be taken care of?
because
Because
they
you
don't
need
provide,
God.
they have no land of their own.
Ah, they have no nachalah. They have no inheritance in the land.
Right.
No tribal territory.
No.
They are dependent upon people bringing the sacrifices and upon the gifts of the people. So, in a sense, if people are not being faithful to God, the priests are going to be the poor. And in the book of Judges, do we see that happening?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we see a traveling Levite who's looking for work. Okay, and he actually winds up going to a man's house and becoming his priest to an idol, because he's so poor. There's no food for him to work, in his priestly work, and he has no inheritance to support himself. So he's looking for any job, and he actually compromises to the point where he becomes priest to an idol for a family. Okay, and so he's saying, be careful not to neglect the Levites. Okay, if you neglect the Levites, what's going to happen? Then the religion of Israel will become corrupt, because the priests will be so desperate they'll do anything just to get a handout. Okay. What that reminds me of is several places in Paul's epistles, and like I think one we just read, when in our New Testament reading we got up to Galatians chapter 4. Okay, I believe it's Galatians chapter 3, where Paul says, we met with the apostles and we discussed doctrine and practice, and they added nothing to what we had to say. In other words, they just agreed with what we were doing. They didn't tell us anything else, except that they said, be careful to remember the poor. And he says that's something we're already eager to do. Okay, and the phrasing, be careful not to neglect the Levite, be careful not to neglect the poor, go right hand in hand in my thought. Anyway, going on from there, he again, in verses 20 through 25, almost word for word repetition of previous paragraphs. And just emphasizing again, make sure you don't eat the blood. Blood is to be poured out in the ground. And actually, I think it's supposed to be buried. And right
Yeah,
here it just says poured out.
Yeah, it's Leviticus that says it has to be covered with earth.
Mhm. Okay. And again, verse 26, take your consecrated things to the place I choose, so that it may go well with you and with your children, because you will be doing what is good and right in the eyes of Yahweh your God. How important is it to most believers that they do what is good and right in God's sight?
They think that they do, a lot of them.
Well,
Okay.
we feel like when we sin, we just go back and ask God to forgive us, and we don't put that much importance on being obedient.
Okay. And when I've talked to numerous traditional Christians, okay, and I've talked to them about the Torah, and the statement I get back repeatedly is, Do I have to do it to be saved? He said, no, you do it to please God. You do it because it's right. Okay, well then I won't worry about it.
That's the point.
Because they're not concerned with pleasing God. They're just concerned with whether or not they're going to be saved. Okay? And that's a wrong attitude. I mean, if our purpose in life is to glorify God, then what pleases God should be the first and foremost thing in our mind.
Isn't there a direction about, do as I say, you will receive blessings, you go against what I say, there will be curses?
Yeah, but it's so easy to bless yourself and ignore God's law.
Yeah.
I think about all the people in business who are blessing themselves financially while ignoring God's law. You know, it just, doing it the world's way is so much simpler than doing it God's way.
And this also includes your children, so that it may always go well with you and your children after
Absolutely,
you.
yeah.
Right. If your children don't see you seeking to please God, are they going to seek to please God?
Nope.
No.
No, because it's, your children pick up what's important from you, not so much from what you say, but from what you do. Okay? If God doesn't play an important role in your life, if your life doesn't conform to what He wants, they're not going to bother with it. Okay. Getting on to the end of the chapter, verse 30. And after they have been, well, let's go back to the beginning of the verse. Verse 28. Yahweh your God will cut off before you the nations you are about to invade and dispossess. But when you have driven them out and settled in their land, and after they have been destroyed before you, be careful not to be ensnared by inquiring about their gods, saying, how do these nations serve their gods? We will do the same. Okay, think about the logic here. Yahweh has brought Israel in. Yahweh is going to conquer these nations whose false gods cannot stand up to Yahweh. Why would you want to worship the gods that Yahweh defeats?
Because you probably intermarried with the women from the land, and you got sort of.
But if my God can
mushy
beat up,
about
if
it
my
all.
God can beat up your God, why would I worship your God?
Well,
Never
sometimes
heard it said that way.
Yeah, I know. But let's put it where the rubber meets the road. My God destroyed your God and his army. Okay, why would I worship your false God?
See, that's what I thought. I thought about that before, but then again, sometimes Israel was defeated.
Mm-hmm. Because they were in rebellion,
Just put it over there.
and God told them it's because you've already disgraced my name among the nations.
But that's the thing. Sometimes the real God's people can be defeated. So just because their God was defeated this time wouldn't necessarily mean that their God isn't real.
Okay, now that raises an interesting
That's
question.
what they're saying.
There's only one
Yes.
God.
We know
know
that.
that.
We know
But they
that.
didn't.
I'm just saying
A
that
God
the people
can be
of the
anything.
past-
If you do everything just for money, money is your God.
Okay.
That's what I mean by a God.
Sometimes they
yeah.
want to please people more than they want to please God
Okay, that would be one reason.
in business.
Going back to the question about Israel being defeated, did the prophets of the pagan countries tell them that Yahweh was going to defeat them because they were being disobedient?
Yes.
Because in Israel's history, the prophets come to them and say the Babylonians are going to come down and they're going to defeat you. This is God's punishment on you. God's going to bring the Assyrians against you and defeat you because you're being disobedient. God is going to come down and carry you off into captivity because you're being disobedient. Did any prophets in the pagan nations come to them and say, God is going to destroy you because you're doing evil?
No.
No, they didn't. Their gods were all there going, yeah, we like these sacrifices, we like these orgies, let's go fight against Yahweh, and Yahweh wipes them out. Okay, so there's a distinction between just saying you won or lost. There's also the prophetic role that comes into it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not just defeat, it's also the prophetic word interpreting the defeat that matters.
I see something in here also that's related to keeping the holy and the profane separate. Because you can't mix any profaneness with the holy. And when you get into a practice that allows you to kind of cross over and do both or either in other places, then, you're getting accustomed to blending things. God requires holiness and obedience.
Okay?
And it says, do not worship, it says, do not worship those false idols. It says, do not worship me the way they worship their gods. That's a key thing, and in today's world, you see that, especially in various Christian churches and denominations. There's something out there that, hey, that's neat, let's try and incorporate that here. What really sticks out is the Christmas tree.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Christmas tree, it's a Jesus tree. It used to be something else, but we, repackaged it.
Renamed it, yeah.
Renamed it, repackaged
Yeah.
it.
That was the Catholics that did that.
Well, the
Okay.
Protestants
Well,
are doing it too.
Oh, yeah.
Various,
But the
I don't know
Catholics started it.
where it started, okay, it started somewhere down, way back in history.
Yes.
But that was the point, they take something out there, hey, let's make this, for various reasons, to try to draw those outside people in, and say, hey, that's what they can identify with, we'll just rename it.
Yeah, the
Winter
early
solstice.
church tried to stamp out
Paganism.
the winter solstice ceremonies. You can read some of the preachers in the 2nd century asking the people in churches, why do you have a round sun god wreath of branches on your front door? I said, that's paganism. You're Christians now. You shouldn't be doing that. Okay, and the church tried for hundreds of years to stamp it out. Finally, they gave up and said, we'll baptize it and redefine it as something Christian. Because
And
they
embrace
just
this.
couldn't get rid of it because everybody loved the winter celebration. It was a fun time. It was a time when you got to do whatever you wanted and nobody held you accountable. Okay, plus there was gift giving and just all kinds of fun stuff going on. And the pagans might say, well, I'm a Christian now, but I ain't giving up Christmas. You know? And so the church baptized it and said, well, we'll say it means this now. We'll celebrate this as the birth of Christ. Even though everybody throughout history has known that Christ wasn't born on December 25th. That's the rebirth of the sun god, not the Messiah. Okay, so don't be inquiring about how the other nations serve their gods. Okay, I don't think that means we have to be totally ignorant, but we don't want to be following in their ways. So we're not going to incorporate what is pagan. And he says they do all kinds of detestable things that Yahweh hates. And the worst of it is they burn their sons and daughters in the sacrificial fires.
There's
Okay.
only once that God asked for someone to sacrifice their child, and he didn't go through with it.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was just a foreshadowing of the coming of Messiah.
Right.
So, and then verse 32, the solemn admonition, see that you do all I command you. Do not add to it or take away from it.
Whoa.
Okay? You know any place else where that phrase, that line comes up?
Revelation.
Book of Revelation. Don't add to it, don't take away from it. Okay? So when people come along and they make up all these wonderful extra laws about how to serve God, are they actually serving God?
Mm-mm.
No. And when people come along and say, well, that doesn't apply today, well, who says that? You say it doesn't apply today. Where does God say it doesn't apply today? And the biggest issue in the current, traditional church is, well, God didn't repeat the Sabbath command in the New Testament.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that before.
Okay, and Romans 14 says that one man honors one day as holy and another man honors another day as holy. Okay, so you can worship God any day you want. The Sabbath doesn't matter. But if you read the very beginning of the chapter,
You mean
it
the
says,
context?
yeah, the context, yeah. I know you never want to do that. Yeah, read the whole chapter. He says, don't receive a weak brother to doubtful disputations. In the Ten Commandments, does anybody here consider the Ten Commandments a doubtful disputation? No, it's a command. God said, do this, don't do that. This is not areas of doubtful disputations. What Paul is talking about in Romans 14 is people coming up with extra holy days. Okay, some of the people like to fast on Tuesdays and have that be a holy day. Other people like to fast on Thursday and make that an extra holy day. And they would argue back and forth. If you read some of the stuff in the early church, people argued about everything. You know, well, we're not going to be sinners like that group over there. They fast on Tuesday instead of Thursday. And it's like all this gobbledygook. And Paul is saying, don't get into all that garbage. That's a doubtful area. But the Ten Commandments are not a doubtful area.
No.
Okay? So when people say, well, the New Testament doesn't repeat the Sabbath commandment, you just say, yeah, well, everybody already knew it. Why do you have to repeat that one? You know? That was already in practice. When Paul went and taught people, where do you teach them? In the synagogue. And when were the Jews meeting at the synagogue? On the Sabbath. There's no question about this, you know, at all.
In Acts,
So-
he talks about how he went on Sabbath to teach them, and then Yeshua, Jesus, went on Sabbath to the synagogue. You know, so it's very clear. We're
Yes.
supposed to live like he did.
You know, it's like having to explain when the sun comes up. You know, you just don't have to. It's already set in stone.
Mary didn't even go to the tomb till after the Sabbath.
Right.
Okay, let's finish up with